Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had two questions. One was for Mr. Greenspan dealing with the value of the dollar, which I will ask you since you've been lucky enough to stay. And also had a question on the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which I think you partially answered. I don't know whether it's to my entire satisfaction, but I do want to bring that up once again. I see the responsibility of us here in the Congress to protect the dollar. I do not see where we should assume that our responsibility here, or the American taxpayer, is to protect the value of foreign currencies. So that is where I start. Now, Mr. Greenspan in his testimony mentioned that it was significant factors contributing to the problem in the Far East had to do with real exchange rates and also unsustainable current account deficits. And yet we run a high accounts deficit, highest in the world, and we have the largest foreign debt. So I would say that this should concern us about the future of the dollar. Although the dollar is riding high, we have high real interest rates. And this may well tell us something about the dollar as well as the price of gold. So the bond market gives us some information there. And those who are concerned about the deflation might just look at the monetary figures showing that M3 right now is currently rising at greater than 10%. So I don't think that we're on the verge of a rapid deflation here anyway. I would like to suggest, though, that to say that the IMF costs us no money is just a little bit disingenuous. We put probably $50 billion in over the year, and we can't use it for anything else. We can't take it out of there and send it to our Social Security beneficiaries. So just because we don't count it on our deficit isn't quite fair. I mean, that to me is just a gimmick. It's sort of like us borrowing from the trust funds and borrowing from Social Security and not counting it in the deficit. But our obligations keep going up. Our national debt keeps going up. We have an obligation now of $17 trillion, which to me is all pressure on the dollar. And every time we go in to bail out these other currencies, I see this as putting tremendous pressure on the dollar. And I want to get your opinion about, do you have any concern about the dollar? Shouldn't we be cautious when we do these things? And also on the Exchange Stabilization Fund, you indicate that there is some technical explanation on the Exchange Stabilization Fund to allow you to do what you're doing. But is it not true that this fund was never used to bail out foreign currencies before? Basically, it was set up to protect the dollar. And here we are, we did it in Mexico, and now we're doing it again. And if you come up short, I'm sure there's plans to borrow more from the Federal Reserve because if the IMF funding doesn't go through, you're not going to have enough money, and you're going to need to go over to the Federal Reserve and get the credit from the Federal Reserve. So I think I can't be convinced that the Exchange Stabilization Fund is really set up to do this. And I am indeed concerned about the future of the dollar. Just a few years ago, we got 80 yen to the dollar. So the markets can turn down, the economy can turn down, revenues can go down, and there's no reason in the world for us not to expect some real burdens here. And my obligation under my oath of office is to protect the American taxpayer and to protect the dollar, not to be carelessly bailing out everybody and our investors overseas.
Congressman, let me first just emphasize something I tried to emphasize in my original oral statement, that the actions we have taken and will take are based on our judgment of how best to pursue American interests and are not motivated by any goal of charity or comity with respect to other countries. On the question of the Exchange Stabilization Fund, I've just been handed legislative language in which Senator Helms explained that the purpose of this amendment, referring to an amendment in 1977, is to specify that the purpose of the exchange stabilization is not exclusively to stabilize the exchange value of the dollar. And indeed, as part of maintaining financial stability, loans to other countries or guarantees to other countries have been provided on many, many occasions in the past, going back at least into the 1960s. That is not a recent practice. We believe that as Americans concerned with the stability of our own economy and our own financial system, we have to recognize that that stability can be put at risk by developments abroad, and that it's appropriate, therefore, as a kind of forward defense of preserving our stability, for us to be supportive of efforts to maintain financial stability in other countries. And that is what we've done through our contribution and our support for efforts at the IMF. The question of the cost of those efforts, perhaps the distinctions are a bit academic. What we have incurred in return for the contribution to the IMF is that we hold an asset represented by our share in the IMF and its financial proceeds. And it is a question of what the value of that asset is, but in light of the historical experience, which is that the financial support the IMF has provided has almost invariably been repaid in full and on time with interest, and in light of the substantial gold reserves that are held by the IMF, I do not feel that we have in any way put taxpayers' funds imprudently at risk with our support for the IMF.
Thank you, Dr. Weld. Dr. Weld.